Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Report to Action, an overview of the Pathways to Prosperity work, both our history and our network. My name is Amy Loyd, and I'm a Vice President at JFF, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kyle Hartung.
Hi, everyone.
So very quickly, we wanted to give you an overview about JFF. You may know us as Jobs for the Future. We're a national nonprofit organization, and our vision is really all about economic advancement for all. Our mission is around accelerating the alignment, transformation, and reimagination of the American workforce and education systems, and this includes their intersection with economic development and core business and industry. And this slide really shows us why we do our work. And mind you, this slide is prior to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis and the unprecedented unemployment claims. So these numbers would only be more exaggerated now. But even in the past year, the things we've been worrying about are the vast majority of people who are struggling in this economy. And so how do we think about low-income young people? How do we think about adults without a high school diploma? How do we think about U.S. workers who are in the workforce but living below the poverty line? How do we think about employers that are struggling to fill jobs? Like, economic mobility is really our drive. And we think about how do we redesign education and workforce to ensure that all of these people are accessing the American dream through ensuring that they have access to economic opportunity. What we do at JFF is we work across 4 key areas. We design, scale, influence, and invest. And the way that we think about this is, we work with the field to design innovative solutions to the challenges that the field's facing. And then we work with the field to scale those solutions across many sites, both within states and across states. We influence policy, we influence funders, we influence state leaders and local leaders and how they do their work. And we help funders and re-grant through sub-awarding resources to the field to ensure that these innovations are sustainable. So across this, as an example, might be our early college high school work, for example. So we work to design a solution of ensuring that all young people who are struggling to engage in high school are actually accelerated into post-secondary college credits. And we help to scale that through a national early college high school network. And then we've influenced policy. So 15 years ago, early college high school was rather radical and revolutionary, and now it's almost commonplace and reflected in most states' education plans. And then we're helping funders and federal dollars flow to early college high schools. When we think about our work is now more important than ever, especially in light of the pandemic crisis that we're facing in 2020. So we're all about preparing people for the future of work, and the future of work is right now. When we think about automation, outsourcing, new arrangements, we all have to think about how work is structured differently. And this is also an argument all about equity. So despite the growth in our economy historically and the challenge that our economy is facing now, our nation is facing ever widening and deepening inequities in how people are able to access economic advancement. And then ultimately, we're all about ensuring that employers have the right talent that they need to keep our economy growing and to keep our communities thriving. So now a word about the Pathways to Prosperity report. In 2011, the Harvard Graduate School of Education released this report, Pathways to Prosperity, that really shone a light on how fundamentally broken our education system is. So this quotation is a pull from it. The American system for preparing young people to lead productive and prosperous lives as adults is clearly badly broken. Failure to aggressively overcome this challenge will surely erode the fabric of our society. This report did not contain any original research, but instead drew upon existing research and data from across states. And it really shone a light on how disconnected our education system is from our workforce system and from ultimate career outcomes for young people. And it lit a fire underneath states and regions, and frankly, in the world. We had requests coming to Harvard from across the world, excuse me, to come speak to them about what we saw in this data and how we see solutions for this data. But I wanted to unpack a little bit of the data that undergirded that report to help you understand why we do the work that we do in the Pathways to Prosperity Network. So this data is from Tony Carnevale and the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce from 2013, 7 years ago of date of this recording, and it was projecting 2020 employment projections, which are those today. Back in 2013, 2020 seemed like an eternity far away into the future. Now that we're living into this, we're recognizing that this data is even all the more important. And this shows that while there is some economy for those just with a high school diploma or less, the vast majority of jobs require some form of post-secondary education. And frankly, you know, in the past few years, 90%, over 90% of new jobs that have been created require a post-secondary credential of some sort. So in today's economy, all the more so, a high school diploma is not enough to successfully enter the job market. And when we look at how we're doing as a nation with respect to our post-secondary credential completion, we have a huge gap and we have to do better. So if you look at this chart, this is showing those holding certificates, some college, no degree, high school diploma, no high school diploma are the solid colors, red, blue, and yellow. And you'll see that that's the majority of American workers who do not have a post-secondary credential with which to enter the economy. We know that our high school graduation rates are stronger than ever before, and we are celebrating that in partnership with districts and states. However, we also know that when you disaggregate data, we're still leaving far too many students behind. So, and also, frankly, you know, we can still do a lot better. We shouldn't be, you know, happy with 85% graduation. We should be aiming for as close to 100% some sort of high school graduation for all students to then transition them into post-secondary education. And frankly, when we look at our educational attainment rates, while our high school completion rates have led the world for decades and then the rest of the world caught up with us, our college completion rates have been alarmingly low and we lag behind the rest of the world in this space. So you think about taking your most precious thing in the world, your son or your daughter, and you send her off to college, and it's frankly a coin toss, excuse me, on whether or not she will complete post-secondary education. So overall, completion rates for higher education are around 55, 56%, and that's an average of 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions. And this is for time and a half completion. So for 4 years, this would be completion in 6 years. For 2 years, this would be completion in 3 years. The bottom line is far too many people start a college degree or credential and don't complete them. And so when I think about implications, like this is a realistic hypothetical subgroup. So I consider my, family out in rural areas who are struggling economically, and maybe 10 of them enter high school, 8 of them might complete high school, 4 students of those 8 might enroll in college, and that's a pretty high enrollment rate. So if you think about 80% high school graduation, and then 50% of those enrolling in some form of higher education, maybe 2% of those will complete a college degree or credential. So of 10 of my family members, 2 would complete, and that's unacceptable given the needs that our economy requires for post-secondary credentials. We need to rethink how we design education so that many more have equitable access and success in post-secondary so that they can transition to the economy. This is a slide that we've been really thinking about when we're thinking about designing how we do our work. A huge challenge that we're facing is that while more students overall are attending college, which is the upper line on each of these wealth groups, the dotted line, attendance is increasing, which is fantastic. With the exception of the highest wealth, it's interesting that attendance is decreasing slightly there. And when you look at the middle wealth and the highest wealth group for completion, which is the solid line, completion is also increasing of college. But when you look at the low wealth students, the lowest 40% of students, graduation rates have stagnated. And so what this tells me is that many more low wealth young people and adults are going off to post-secondary education, investing time and money and opportunity cost, and not graduating any more than they had been previously. And so we're really tending to equity in this work, both along race and class, but looking at wealth here and considering, like, how are we designing systems that really serve all people? Another concern that we have is disconnected youth, and this is our young people who have disengaged from K-12 and are not in any sort of employment or training program. And these young people, ages 16 to 24, are cut off from all the systems that they need to develop the skills and the sense of purpose that they need to live rewarding lives. And by rewarding, we mean economically and socially and emotionally. And so when we're thinking about disconnected youth, We're nearing 5 million, probably more with respect to COVID-19. And how do we design systems that can re-engage young people into pathways to success? When we think about post-secondary education, we know that what young people and adults study matter. And what this graph is showing you on the left here are different post-secondary credentials. So the turquoise is a 4-year degree, the red is a 2-year degree, and the yellow is a certificate. So if you look at what you study, if you're getting a 2-year degree in a STEM field, usually an Associates of Applied Science of sorts, you are out earning a 4-year degree holder in a humanities or liberal arts field. And so correspondingly, looking down, someone holding a certificate in STEM fields outholds a 4-year degree holder in education or psychology and social services. And so this shows that, yes, purpose matters. We want people to follow their heart and their dreams, and we want people to understand the economic implications of what they study and the opportunities for them for employment in the labor market. And a 4-year degree for all is not the answer for all. You may have seen this data before. This is from the Equality of Opportunity Project. This is showing that if you're born in the 1940s, your chance of out-earning your parents was above 90%. Whereas if you're born in the 80s, maybe around 50%. Children are not out-earning their parents now as they used to historically. And when we think about the American dream, the vision is that your young people, your children, go on to do even better than you did. And yet we see that that's increasingly not the case, and this is concerning. We need to think with an economic lens towards how we're creating a future for our young people. And we know that STEM opportunities abound. So when people think about the STEM economy, they often think about 4-year degree trajectories and higher. So, those working as physicians, those working as, leading scientists in their fields. And yet this is from a report that Brookings did a while ago. They unearthed that half of all STEM jobs are not requiring a 4-year degree. Half of all STEM jobs are in the sub-baccalaureate space. 1 in 5 jobs in the US is a STEM job, and there are so many STEM openings. So when we think about science, technology, engineering, and math, we see tremendous opportunity from an economic lens and from a creative, engaging lens. So we want to think about what STEM opportunities might hold for young people, especially in middle skills jobs. The term middle skills simply means sub-baccalaureate or jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. And so when we look at examples of middle skills jobs, we think about a lot of opportunity in tech fields, a lot of opportunity, frankly, in engineering, or an amazing array of technicians and therapists in healthcare, or life, physical, and social sciences. These all earn living wages that allow people to raise a family, stay in their hometown, earn a wage that allows them to fulfill their vision and their dreams and continue to experience lifelong learning and career trajectory growth. And so this is what we're thinking about when we're thinking about career pathways, is what are the middle skill jobs or the sub-baccalaureate jobs that could provide a good first step for young people as they enter the labor market. A quick note on education. This is from Mark Schneider and some research he did a few years ago on the staying power of different kinds of post-secondary credentials. And so when you look at median earnings by credential level, this is from the state of Colorado, but it holds true in other places where he's also done this research. The dark blue is median earnings in their first year. The lightest blue is 5 years out, and kind of the medium blue is 10 years out. And so when we look at the bottom two, the Associates of Applied Science and the bachelor's degree, right out of earning that post-secondary credential, those with an AAS out-earn those with a bachelor's degree by almost $10,000. 5 years out, they still out-earn them, and 10 years out, they're on par with them. We know that over time, the trajectory is such that there's a really strong correlation between education and income. So the higher degree of education you have, the higher income you tend to have. But this again shows that what you study matters. And sometimes it's not a 4-year degree that gets you to the right income. Sometimes it's the right focused program of study that connects to your labor market that can give you the living wage and the growth trajectory that we want all Americans to have. So the bottom line is, why do we need college and career pathways? We know that education, workforce development, economic development are all interconnected and interdependent. We know high school isn't working for far too many. We know far too few people complete a post-secondary degree or credential. We think about STEM fields, and we also think about how much our employers struggle to find skilled employees. And we also see that careers increasingly require some form of post-secondary education and work readiness skills. So when we think about all of this put together, we think, all right, how might we, given the energy that the Pathways to Prosperity report spurred in the field, how might we create a group of leading experts, thinkers, doers, state leaders, regional leaders, to put our heads together and try to solve some of these challenges in a more holistic and integrated way? And that's how we started our Pathways to Prosperity network. So our Pathways to Prosperity community is formed of these states. If you see the dark shaded states, those are current members. If you see the light shaded states, those are former members. Those with circles around them are places where we've had Pathways to Prosperity related engagements. And what I love about this map is that it shows that this work is equally relevant regardless of political stances, regardless of rural versus urban, regardless of the state size and state population. Like, this is uniquely bipartisan work that's essential to young people, employers, communities, and economies equally. And so we're learning across these incredible places that are leading our nation in rethinking how we design systems for equity with a lens on career opportunities and growth. Kyle, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a little bit about what our Pathways to Prosperity community is and what we do in this work.
Thanks so much, Amy. Yeah, this is a great point to start to talk a little bit more about the broad network and community that we've built since 2012. And I think that the other critical point to understand about the states and regions and cities, as well as some of these adjacent projects, is this work is predicated on an understanding that this is not designed to be a new program or an add-on reform to what people are already doing, but really an effort and a set of strategies to really work to align and bolster existing initiatives that will wind up improving education and workforce and economic outcomes. So as we work across the country in states and regions and cities, we hear common questions at all levels of systems that really resonate and bulwark not just the why we do the work, but the how we do how we do the work. You know, we hear from employers about the challenge in pipeline, and in particular, a diverse pipeline of talent over a long period of time. We hear from educators in the K-12 system about what does it really take and what does it look like to truly prepare young people to be for post-secondary readiness, success, and to enter the labor market. You know, we hear from our post-secondary and higher education partners about, you know, the questions that they have and the authentic inquiry around how do they really ensure that students are learning what they need to learn and attaining the credentials they need to attain to obtain the success that they hope to have in their young adult and ultimately adult lives. You know, and we also hear from economic development about how do they welcome employers and industries into their regions by participating in a conversation about building a talent pipeline. And ultimately, a common question we hear from both students as well as employers is, you know, how do I know what I need so that I can enter the labor market? And how do I know that young people are really genuinely prepared? So this work is then ultimately very much about what it means to prepare youth to be future ready. And historically, our systems have provided very little advice to young people about sort of pathways from education into the world of work and how education can align with careers, but even what it means to have a career and what career possibilities might be available for young people and what it takes to attain those things. I think historically we have really talked very infrequently with young people about the role of work in human life and what it means to find dignity and value and meaning in working life, knowing that we spend 90,000 or more hours in our adult lives working. What does it really look like to have a conversation with young people about identifying and pursuing career pathways that allow them to find the meaning and dignity that allows them to stand up strongly into who they are as community members and family members and providers. Ultimately, few families and even educators have a strong understanding of the future labor market, and sometimes even the current one. And you know, we have such little experience of contemporary high growth industries. I was a teacher myself. I taught literature and performance, which also sort of suggested that I knew very little about what a career in IT might look like. And so how do we start to change the nature of the conversation that occurs within educational context and among partners in a broader ecosystem to make sure that young people start to understand what the labor market is, how to use labor market data and information to make really clear decisions and structure opportunities for young people over time. And this is a really important conversation now more than ever, in that certainly for my generation, I used to hear when I was a young person, people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I never liked that question particularly, but new research emerging from Emily Lockwood at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is finding that young people have also shifted their interest in what this question is really about, instead asking questions about what they want their life to be like in the future. And I think that this is so right, and this is an opportunity for us to engage young people in this conversation, in that they have so many different visions about the permanency of a career. Some young people are more likely to feel pressure to pick a career that they will have to stay with for their entire life, even if it's something that they end up hating, unless we start to change the way we talk about careers and career pathways with young people. And unless we do, one of the fears we hold is that this will become especially true for lower income youth who feel like they have little margin for error when choosing a career. And how do we make sure that they don't experience a lot of pressure to get it right the first time? And so how do we design opportunities and experiences for young people that help them to sort of shape what we would call their own lenses on the future, sort of a sense of a lens of who they want to be, what they want their life to be like, this lens of self, society, how they want to contribute to society, what type of problems that they want to solve, and how do they want to be a part of those solutions, but also understanding what it means to be secure and obtain fiscal responsibility. And so if we can sort of package the design of these systems through these lenses, it can go a long way in helping young people to make early decisions that can start to introduce them to what could lead to very meaningful careers for themselves. And so as we think about doing this work, it really is about redesigning systems that will work for all young people. And we've taken a lot of best practice from the field and synthesized them into what we could say are some four really big approaches that we think are really critical to focus on. So one is, how do we make sure that all high school students are ending their secondary experience with at least 12 early college credits and work-based learning experiences that really set them on a trajectory and with some clarity about what their first post-secondary credential might look like? And how do we make sure that they have an understanding that that post-secondary credential will have value in the labor market? How do we work with young people and across institutions to make sure that those credentials will allow them to advance over time deeper into careers and understand how it's aligned to the type of education that would be necessary to continue to progress through an industry or possibly shift industries along a different career trajectory? And that ultimately, how do we ensure that all young people have access to launch a career that is in a field that is high demand and high wage and high growth, and that can lead to family sustaining wages? So in our work across the network, our partners are working along many fronts. And we would say that these are some of the core strategies and implementation for building these ecosystems for college and career pathways. So one critical component of this work is the forging of education and industry partnerships, recognizing that neither side of this equation can do this work alone or independent of the influence and insight of the other party. But also through these types of partnerships, both sides get to understand better about how they each think about young people and careers, what it takes to prepare young people for educational attainment, what it takes to be ready to enter the workforce, and that only through real collaboration can that conversation begin to change and alignment begin to occur. Work-based learning is a really critical component of building a college and career pathways ecosystem. This work can't just be about what they learn in school and then going to get a job, but how do we build in intentionally designed iterative experiences for young people beginning as early as the middle grades, and that extends with clear connections up into the post-secondary realm so that they can have increasingly complex opportunities to engage in the world of work, deploy what they're learning in academic contexts in the workplace, and use the new insights they're gaining from their experience in the workplace to further refine and hone their visions for what types of careers they might want to pursue. A strong focus on leadership and policy is really critical as we think about not just institutional leadership, but also cross-stakeholder leadership. And what does it really mean to lead for change and be agents of change as leaders? And as we think about the policy context, this can be the big P policy as we think about statute and legislation, but also really thinking critically and examining the little p policies that we deploy within institutions or across them that either open access or limit it. So this is a really strong strategy that we work with our partners to put a strong spotlight on as we start to examine what it takes to really build these systems. Early and frequent career information and advising systems is crucial, and that one of these last strategies to focus on for a moment here is this idea of secondary and post-secondary alignment and integration. And that historically these systems have been very disconnected from one another, let alone disconnected from the workforce. And so part of this work is about really being clear with young people what it takes to move from secondary into post-secondary, structuring early college course-taking opportunities, aligning work-based learning across institutional lines so that students can move through these systems in a way that feels coherent to them, and that these systems by design are signaling to them where they need to go, how they need to get there, where are the on-ramps and off-ramps that will allow them to progress over time. So as we think about this work, on this slide, you see moving from the left to the right is a blending of the design of a system that has multiple on and off ramps along the pathway. So the intentional blending of a rigorous academic structure with strong career-focused and aligned learning that allows people to move through systems in secondary and post-secondary with really clear signals about where they can get on and off of this pathway as they obtain additional credentials over time, how they can develop their competency through work-based learning and ultimately entering the workforce, but re-engaging and continuously engaging in the educational context to obtain jobs that require more refined skill sets over time, and then ultimately leading to stronger and improved outcomes that impact not just young people, but also in the economy as well. The challenge of moving from the left to right is that often our systems have been designed like this. The way that we really need to design these systems is more of a reverse engineered design. Given the complexities of the world that we're currently living in, the design of this system really needs to be reverse engineered, really beginning with the employer lens and the labor market. As we think about the future of work and the future of education, as we think about the kinds of competencies and skills and knowledge that young people need to enter the workforce, what are the critical sector strategies that allow access and opportunity across industries in the United States? And that ultimately, what are the conditions for work-based learning that exist within industries more broadly, but also within individual companies that welcome young people into that environment? And once we can get really clear on that, how do we then frame the conversation about moving through the post-secondary context and making sure that credentials and course taking are really clearly aligned with the labor market, that these signal systems are in place for people and families to understand where to get on and off as they need to enter the labor market to support families, and then re-engage to support career advancement, and that ultimately makes sure that partnerships and the post-secondary really being a critical bridge between the secondary and the employer sector. And that with all of this context information leaning into the design of the secondary system with an operationalizing, sorry about that, the word "and" in college and career for all. How do we think really clearly about dual enrollment that is aligned with credentials with value in the labor market, these systems for career advising that push way back into the middle grades, but that really support students up into their first employment experiences, and really focus on critical foundational employability skills and meaning making and wayfinding for young people. Now, reverse engineering from the employer side back into the secondary is really critical as we look at the way that our economy has evolved over time. We've shifted to a learning economy. A great deal of disruption has already arrived. We have for a decade, and even more so now, seeing an incredible amount of job loss and job change. And ultimately, our institutions are not adequately preparing young people for the future of work, which has arrived today. And our political and economic institutions have been poorly equipped to handle the types of hard choices that come with the way that the economy has evolved. And what you see here in the graph on the right is that since going back to the early 1980s, what we've seen is a consistent and steady rise of work in the economy that is non-routine in nature, and whether that is manual or physical labor or white-collar work or cognitive type of work. But what has remained static and has not grown and in effect then has diminished is work that is routine in nature, whether mentally or manually routine. And the other thing that this signals is a change in our relationship with the economy itself. Historically, we used to think about getting an education, going to work, getting promotions, maybe changing jobs 1 or 2 times, and then eventually moving into a comfortable place for retirement. But the new economy has really changed the nature of that conversation at a fundamental level. And what we see now are expectations that our young people are expected to move through upwards of 17 different jobs in a variety of sectors. And so we really need to restructure and design systems to account for this, and opportunities to continually engage, to learn, to recondition how we think about what we do and why, and to be endlessly learning so that we can ultimately impact a number of different outcomes at scale. And so through the lens of our network, we really think about 4 transformative outcomes that our designs are expected to hold. One has to do with students. We want every student to have clear college and career goals with the supports to achieve them. We're equally concerned about employers and wanting to make sure that all employers in all industries have a pipeline of a diverse pipeline of young professionals with the skills that they need to contribute to and lead the workforce of the future. We're really concerned and we're really attentive to communities, and how do we make sure that communities are vibrant and that people are willing to and interested in staying home and deploying their talents in a local context and being connected and interconnected and engaged citizens with one another. And ultimately, this work is very much about economies, and how do we make sure that both regional and state level economies are thriving and growing, and that they provide opportunities for upward mobility for all of our citizens. One of the challenges that this work is faced with is what you see in this picture, which is sort of everyone from across stakeholder groups pointing their finger at everyone else and sort of placing the blame, so to speak. So on the upper corner here, you see a man in a business suit sort of pointing over to the right to the college president and saying, we need better educated workers, and the college president sort of kicking that can down the line and saying, well, we need better educated high school graduates, and the high school pointing to the middle schools, and the middle schools to the elementary schools, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, what we need is to change the nature of that conversation by design. And what this is really about is creating essentially a networked village. And it's not about having any one stakeholder group in the center of this conversation, but it's really about aligning systems and practices and organizations with a clear, specific mission in the center. And so here we've put equitable economic advancement. As we think about this, like, this is not the work of any one agency or any one organization, but we really need to think and pitch a very large tent and ask people to come to the table from community-based organizations, from business and industry, intermediaries, our national partners, our state and government agencies and associations, our 2- and 4-year college and universities, our workforce and econ development partners, and K-12 education to come together to attain a common goal. So the power of this network can really be represented through a couple of big ideas. And so the Pathways to Prosperity Network is very much about sharing, learning, a set of shared goals, and some metrics around some shared impact that we have for young people, for employers, for communities, and for economies. It's about coordinated stakeholder engagement over time. It's about an economy of scale and increased capacity, rather than people off in isolation working independent of one another. How do we pool our resources and collective knowledge to obtain impact at scale more quickly? And ultimately then, how do we start to develop and share data and metrics and analysis of what is working and what is not, to actually then forge stronger coalitions of policy advocates across the country at state, local, and regional levels that can really move the needle and change. So the value proposition of the Pathways to Prosperity Network can be described along two dimensions. One is a dimension of impact, and the other is a dimension of knowledge. So if you look along the left side of this picture here, this domain of impact, we see individual members of the network finding opportunities to have individual impact by being a member of this network. And how do they identify and adapt knowledge that is being used in other places in the field to make real change at a local or contextualized level? But also we think about their opportunity to build collective and coordinated impact across state lines and across regional lines. And then if you look across the top level here, you see this idea of knowledge, right? And so part of the work of our network is about sharing existing knowledge. How are people currently working in the field? How are people coordinating, and what can we learn from that? With an ultimate goal of producing new knowledge that is either in support of these individual members, but also to really push the edge around learning and innovation in this work and what is actually possible. So how can the network support you and your work? We work from a mindset that it's very much about tailoring and catering technical assistance and supports to the needs of any given local context or constituent groups. Pathways to Prosperity is not a model. It is a deployment of some tested and evidence-based strategies. And so we use those to help you do strategic planning and development, to think through policy development and advocacy and analysis. How do we take stock through asset mapping and landscape analysis of what's happening on the ground, what stakeholders are currently deploying their resources towards the right end, but possibly not in coordinated ways? What is the labor market signaling about what are the needs of your regional and local economies? How do we help you to build and stand up regional pathways and mobilize the right partners at the right time with the right leadership structures? What does sustainability look like over time, and ultimately a great deal more? And so just to put a point on some of that, we'd like to highlight one example from one of our earliest members is the state of Delaware. And just to highlight how they've put all of these pieces and strategies together over time to scale for impact. And so Delaware thinks very much about building a strong workforce and the role that educators and employers play in providing meaningful access and opportunity for young people to get there. And you can see on the right-hand side the way that they have been very clear in communicating with students and families and teachers about what does the data say in each of the industries about the types of roles that are available, what does a career trajectory look like, what is the growth. Something really critical that Delaware has done that can be scaled not just at a state level, but also at regional or local levels is really clear strategic planning that wound up being organized around 5 core priorities that you see in this slide. So you see the Department of Education, really leaning into the building of career preparation system. You see the technical college leaning in and committing itself to scaling and sustaining work-based learning at scale. The Department of Labor at the table thinking and leading the efforts around integrating education and workforce across the state. You see foundations and community-based organizations in the form of United Way and the Rodell Foundation working together to coordinate financial supports across sectors, and ultimately workforce development at the table being the connective piece and the translator between employers and educators and service providers. Also not represented on that slide, but what you see here is the pitching of a very large tent from across the state, and really seeing executive level leadership bringing people together and welcoming voices to the table to develop and lead a shared mission and vision. Delaware, and nor do any of our partners rely on miracles in this work. People roll up their sleeves and they do hard work together, the hard work of collaboration and learning and listening to lead and make transformation that can lead to impact. Really quickly, just to show you a little bit of how Delaware has looked at this, because this is common about what we find across the country, is really taking a clear look at the labor market and how it's aligned. And what you see here, for instance, in Delaware, is that their labor market can be organized into 3 categories of employment, into low, middle, and high skills jobs. And it's data like this that is really and has transformed Pathways in Delaware in being able to articulate what is required for different skill levels of different jobs, what are the potential average wages of those, what are the credentials that you need, how do you move from one to another, what proportion of the labor market is represented by employment with different levels of skill, and how ultimately it's about Delaware's youth employment strategy, which they've defined really clearly through the lens of Delaware Pathways. In particular, just to highlight the power of this collaborative model, has Delaware's scale of 40 students in Pathways in 2014 to this last year, over 50% of the students, high school student population in Pathways in just a few short years. And so it's a remarkable example of what happens when you coalesce around a big, bold vision together and work together towards scale. And very critically, focusing on shared outcomes and metrics that are publicly reported, that are aligned to all of the core priorities of your strategic plan, that are coordinated across sectors, and that are monitored. And changes are made as data is revealed. And so a huge celebration of Delaware, but this work is reflected in across our network at both state, regional, and local levels. So would love to welcome Amy back into the conversation here to see if you have any other final points about Delaware or any of our other partners, or about Henry Ford.
Thanks, Kyle. So while Delaware has the benefit of being a small state and have, close relationships within that small state and people all being able to come together and work together on a common challenge, they also are contending with the same challenges that any state does in balancing federal expectations, multiple districts, business and industry engagement. And so we really look to Delaware as an example of what we believe any state could do in terms of coalescing around a Pathways agenda. But about Henry Ford, so there's a myth that Henry Ford once said, if I had asked people what they want, they would have told me faster horses. In other words, the person who was reinventing how we imagine transportation altogether was thinking about, what does the consumer of my product want? Well, that person knows horses as the only way to get from point A to point B. And what they're going to want is a faster horse to get from point A to point B. But instead, he took a big step back and thought about transforming the transportation industry altogether with the advent of vehicles. A side note is that some of the early cars had horse heads on the front so that people could psychologically feel connected to them in the same way that they did their horses. But ultimately, this is what we want you to do with your career pathways, is we don't want you to do more faster horses. We don't want you to do more of the same, only perhaps even bigger and at scale. We want you to radically rethink how education takes place, where education takes place, and with whom in partnership, so that education, workforce, and economic development can truly be interconnected, interdependent, and aligned and integrated to serve our young people and our economy. So not just faster horses is one of our mottos at JFF. When we're thinking about this isn't just more of the same, this is about doing things radically differently.
That's right. And one of the ways we see this translate into action is also part of this not just faster horses mantra is very much about how do we focus on systems and not programs? How do we focus on expectations and not opportunities? And how do we focus on systematizing rather than standardizing? So in a final word, just to kind of share, a few years back, Toni Morrison wrote a piece that was published in the New Yorker where she was talking about growing up as a young girl and a young woman in the South, working in other people's homes as a servant, and how she had to develop two identities. And she talked about that there was the identity she held as someone who worked, and that there was the identity she held as a woman, as a family member, as a human. But I think that we're at a critical juncture right now where we have an opportunity to bring these two things together and create systems that welcome and create the conditions for young people to walk out the other side of their experiences with us so that they can look out at the world and see this relationship and this entanglement between the work that they do and the person that they are. And that's a very bold proposition to put on the table that I think we have an opportunity to collectively lean into. And we look forward to continuing to do this work with you. And so we thank you very much for joining the conversation today. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We would be delighted to spend more time talking with you about what we covered in this presentation, to share with you more details about some of our many other partners and the good work that they're doing. But thank you again. Amy, any final words?
No, thanks everyone. Here's to building systems of career pathways together. We look forward to partnering with you.